The gunshot that shattered the evening calm of Whiskey Rose Saloon wasn't meant to kill, just to terrify. Olivia Grayson froze mid-step as the bullet splintered the floorboard inches from her bare feet, her breath catching in her throat as the raucous laughter of the men at the tables swelled around her. "Dance faster, girl," hollered Abe Thornton, the saloon's owner, his bloated face glistening with sweat in the lamplight. "These gentlemen paid good money to see you perform." Arizona Territory, 1882. Springerville was nothing like the peaceful farming community Olivia had left behind in Missouri. But after her parents died of fever and the bank took their farm, she'd had little choice but to accept the offer of respectable employment from a traveling businessman who'd promised decent wages at a frontier establishment. The lies had become apparent the moment she'd arrived at the Whiskey Rose 3 months ago. "I said dance." Another shot, closer this time, making her jump back with a cry that only amused the crowd further. Olivia forced her trembling legs to move, twirling in the threadbare dress that revealed far more than it concealed. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not again. 20 years old and trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Outside, the spring storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain hammering against the roof of the saloon as thunder rolled across the desert. None of the patrons seemed to care, their attention fixed on Olivia's forced performance. None except for the stranger who had slipped in minutes before, soaked from the downpour, his tall frame now leaning against the back wall, face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "Faster," Thornton demanded, raising his pistol again. Before he could fire, the stranger's voice cut through the din, low but carrying a dangerous edge that silenced the room in an instant. "That's enough." Every head turned as the tall man stepped forward, pushing his hat back to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, but not yet 30 years of age. His eyes, steel gray and unblinking, were fixed on Thornton. "You pointing that gun at the lady is making me nervous," he continued, his stance casual but his hand hovering near the holster at his hip. "And when I get nervous, folks tend to get hurt." Thornton's face reddened. "This ain't your business, cowboy. The girl works for me." "People work for wages," the stranger replied, his gaze flicking briefly to Olivia, taking in her bruised wrists and the fear in her eyes. "They don't dance for bullets." Olivia stood frozen, caught between terror and a fragile spark of hope as the standoff stretched between the two men. Thornton had a reputation for cruelty, but there was something in the stranger's eyes that spoke of capabilities far beyond those of an ordinary drifter. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Thornton snarled. The stranger's mouth curved into the barest suggestion of a smile. "Name's Yates Parker. Just passing through on my way to Fort Apache." Whispers rippled through the saloon. Even in this remote corner of Arizona Territory, people knew that name, the Ranger. Someone muttered. "U.S. Marshal now," Parker corrected without taking his eyes off Thornton. "And I don't much like what I'm seeing here." Thornton's gun hand wavered. The marshals weren't to be trifled with, especially not this one. Stories of Yates Parker had spread across the territory, how he'd tracked the Hollister gang through 200 miles of Badlands, how he'd faced down 8 Comancheros single-handed at Diablo Crossing. She's indentured," Thornton stammered, lowering his pistol slightly. "Owes me for her passage here, room and board." "How much?" Parker interrupted. "What, her debt? How much?" Thornton looked confused for a moment, then calculating. $200. A ridiculous sum, more than most men earned in a year. But Parker simply nodded and reached into his coat, withdrawing a leather wallet. He counted out bills and tossed them onto the nearest table. "There's $250. That covers her debt and any inconvenience." His eyes found Olivia's. "Miss, I believe you're free to go should you choose." The saloon fell utterly silent. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she looked from Parker to Thornton, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Freedom, so suddenly within reach after months of captivity. "She ain't going nowhere," Thornton growled, recovering his nerve. "Money or no money, I own this saloon, and I say—" The words died in his throat as Parker's hand moved with blinding speed, drawing and cocking his revolver in one fluid motion. "I didn't ask what you say," Parker said softly. "Miss, get your things. You don't have to dance for these men anymore." For the first time in months, Olivia felt the chains of her captivity loosen. With trembling hands, she gathered the tattered shawl that had fallen to the floor. I need to get my belongings," she whispered. Parker nodded, his eyes never leaving Thornton. "Do that. I'll be waiting." Olivia hurried to the small storage room off the kitchen that served as her quarters, her mind racing. She had precious little to pack, just a threadbare carpet bag containing a change of clothes, a faded daguerreotype of her parents, and a small Bible that had somehow survived Thornton's initial search of her possessions. Within minutes, she was back in the main room of the saloon. The tension remained thick enough to cut with a knife. Parker stood exactly where she'd left him, his revolver still trained on Thornton, whose face had gone from red to an unhealthy purple. "You ready?" Parker asked without looking at her. Olivia nodded, then realized he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Good." Parker began backing toward the door, gesturing for her to follow. "Anyone thinks about following us," he addressed the room at large, "should reconsider. Quickly." Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain turning the main street of Springerville into a river of mud. Parker holstered his weapon and shrugged off his duster, draping it around Olivia's shoulders. "My horse is at the livery," he said, nodding toward the far end of town. "Can you make it that far?" "Yes," Olivia replied, pulling the coat tighter around herself, overwhelmed by the sudden kindness after so many months of cruelty. Thank you, Marshal. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Something flickered in Parker's eyes, not pity, but a deeper understanding that made Olivia feel seen as a person for the first time since arriving in Arizona. "You don't owe me anything," he said simply. "And you don't have to come with me if you don't want to. I can get you on the next eastbound stage if you'd prefer to return home." Home. The word struck Olivia like a physical blow. "There's nothing left for me in Missouri," she said quietly. "The farm's gone. My parents are buried there. I have no family left." Parker nodded, his expression unreadable in the rain-soaked darkness. "Then we should get moving. Thornton seems like the type to find his courage at the bottom of a whiskey bottle." They made their way through the downpour to the livery stable, where a sleepy stable boy roused himself at their approach. Parker paid him generously to saddle his horse, a magnificent buckskin gelding that stood at least 16 hands high. "This is Thunder," Parker said, stroking the horse's neck. "He's carried me through worse weather than this." Olivia approached cautiously, extending her hand to let the horse catch her scent. Thunder nickered softly, nudging her palm with his velvety muzzle. "He likes you," Parker observed with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "That's good. He's particular about people." "Where are we going?" Olivia asked, suddenly aware that she was placing her trust in a complete stranger, albeit one who had just saved her from a life of degradation. "I told Thornton the truth. I'm headed for Fort Apache on business." Parker secured her meager bag to the saddle. "There's a settlement about 15 miles south of here where we can stop for the night, run by good people who won't ask questions." He helped Olivia mount, then swung up behind her with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. She stiffened momentarily at the proximity, but there was nothing threatening in his presence, only a solid warmth that felt like security after so long without it. They rode out of town in silence, the rain gradually tapering to a gentle mist as they left Springerville behind. The road wound through stands of ponderosa pine, their scent sharp and clean in the night air. Olivia found herself relaxing by degrees, lulled by the steady rhythm of Thunder's gait and the knowledge that with each step she was putting distance between herself and the nightmare of the Whiskey Rose. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible above the soft squelch of hooves in mud. "Why help me? You don't know me." Parker was quiet for so long that Olivia thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice held a weight that spoke of personal ghosts. "I knew someone once who needed help and didn't get it," he said. "I swore I'd never look the other way again." He paused. "Besides, no one deserves to be treated like property." The simple dignity in those words brought tears to Olivia's eyes, not the desperate tears she'd fought back at the saloon, but something cleansing, like the rain that had washed the desert clean. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest stirring of hope. As they crested a rise, the moon broke through the clouds, illuminating the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory stretching before them. Olivia took a deep breath of the rain-washed air, tasting freedom. "You'll only dance for joy now," Parker said quietly. "That's a promise." In that moment, under the vast Arizona sky, Olivia allowed herself to believe him. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached the settlement. Parker had mentioned a cluster of adobe buildings surrounded by cultivated fields, nestled in a protected valley. As they approached, Olivia could see figures moving about, beginning the day's work despite the early hour. "This is San Miguel," Parker explained as they rode toward the main compound. "It's a mission settlement. Father Thomas runs it with help from a few families and some Apache who have chosen to live here rather than on the reservation." "Will they take me in?" Olivia asked, suddenly anxious. After her experience in Springerville, she had reason to be wary of strangers. "They will," Parker assured her. "Father Thomas doesn't turn anyone away. He's sheltered escaped slaves, Mexican refugees, and Apache families who left the reservation. One exhausted young woman won't faze him." As they approached the mission gates, a tall figure in a worn cassock emerged from the main building, shading his eyes against the rising sun. "Yates Parker," the priest called out, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "It's been nearly a year since you've darkened our doorstep. What brings the territory's most notorious lawman to our humble mission?" Parker dismounted, then helped Olivia down. She wobbled slightly, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Father Thomas," Parker greeted the priest with a respectful nod. "We're in need of shelter for a day or two. This is Miss Olivia Grayson. She's recently come into some difficulties in Springerville." Understanding dawned in the older man's eyes as he took in Olivia's appearance, the too revealing dress partially hidden beneath Parker's duster, the bruises on her wrists, the weariness in her face. "Miss Grayson," Father Thomas said gently, "you are most welcome here. Maria," he called to a passing woman, "please show our guest to the women's quarters and find her something to eat and some fresh clothing." The woman, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a face lined by sun and laughter, approached with a warm smile. "Come, miss," she said in accented English. "You look like you could use some rest and a hot meal." Olivia hesitated, glancing back at Parker. For all that he was still largely a stranger, he represented safety in a world that had proven dangerous and unpredictable. "It's all right," he assured her. "You'll be safe here. I need to speak with Father Thomas about my business at Fort Apache, but I won't leave without telling you." With a nod, Olivia allowed Maria to lead her away, conscious of Parker's eyes following her, until they disappeared into one of the adobe buildings. Inside, the women's quarters were simple, but clean, a far cry from the squalid room she'd occupied at the Whiskey Rose. Maria brought her to a small chamber with a narrow bed, a washing stand, and a wooden chest. "You rest," the woman said firmly. "I bring food and clothes. Then you sleep." Exhaustion washed over Olivia as the adrenaline of the night's events finally ebbed. "Thank you," she managed, lowering herself onto the bed. True to her word, Maria soon returned with a tray bearing a bowl of fragrant stew, fresh bread, and a cup of coffee. She also brought a simple dress of blue cotton, a chemise, and other necessities. "These belong to my daughter," she explained. "She married last year and moved to Tucson. They should fit you well enough until we can make something better." Olivia was overwhelmed by the kindness. "I don't know how to thank you." Maria patted her hand. "No thanks needed. We all help each other here. Now eat, then sleep. You are safe." After washing away the grime of the journey and changing into the clean clothes, Olivia fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first peaceful rest she'd had in months. She awoke to late afternoon sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, but then the events of the previous night came flooding back. She was free. No more dancing at gunpoint, no more enduring the leering stares and grasping hands of Thornton's customers. After splashing water on her face and smoothing her hair as best she could, Olivia ventured out into the mission compound. Children played in the central courtyard, their laughter a balm to her spirit. Women worked at outdoor ovens, the scent of baking bread filling the air, while men tended to livestock in nearby pens. She found Parker with Father Thomas, deep in conversation near the mission's small chapel. The marshal looked up as she approached, and something in his expression shifted, a softening around the eyes that Olivia might have missed if she hadn't been watching closely. "Miss Grayson," he greeted her, straightening from where he'd been leaning against the adobe wall. "You're looking rested." "I feel like a new person," she admitted. "Thank you again for bringing me here." Father Thomas smiled benevolently. "Marshal Parker was just telling me about your situation. Please know that you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. We always have use for another pair of hands, and you would be safe here." Olivia's heart swelled with gratitude. "That's very kind of you, Father." "It's settled then," the priest said with satisfaction. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must attend to the evening services." He nodded to them both before disappearing into the chapel. Left alone with Parker, Olivia suddenly felt shy. In the light of day, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall and lean, with broad shoulders and features that might have been handsome if not for the scar that bisected his left eyebrow and the perpetual wariness in his gray eyes. "Father Thomas says you're welcome to stay," he said, stating the obvious in a way that suggested he was as unsure of himself as she was. "It's a good place, safe." "And you?" Olivia asked, surprising herself with her directness. "You're continuing to Fort Apache." Parker nodded, his gaze drifting to the mountains visible on the horizon. "I need to deliver some documents to the commanding officer there. Territorial business." "I see." Olivia tried to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. Of course he would leave. He had his duty, his life. She was just another person he'd helped along the way, part of his job, nothing more. "When will you go?" "At first light tomorrow," he replied. "It's another day's ride to the fort." Silence stretched between them, filled with things unsaid. Olivia was startled to realize how much she'd come to depend on this man's presence in the short time she'd known him. The thought of being left alone again, even in this peaceful place, filled her with a nameless dread. "Will you come back?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Parker's eyes met hers, and for a moment, something unguarded flickered in their depths. "I hadn't planned to," he admitted, "but I could if you wanted me to." The simplicity of his answer stole Olivia's breath. Here was a man who dealt in straightforward truths, so different from the deceptions she'd encountered since leaving Missouri. "I would like that," she said softly. The barest hint of a smile touched his lips before he looked away, clearing his throat. "Then I'll come back. But you should know, Miss Grayson, that my life isn't an easy one. I'm on the trail more often than not, hunting men who don't want to be found." "I understand," Olivia replied, though in truth, she couldn't fully comprehend the life of a U.S. Marshal in this wild territory. "And please call me Olivia." "Olivia," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Then you should call me Yates. Only outlaws call me Marshal Parker, and usually right before I arrest them." The unexpected touch of humor surprised a laugh from her, a rusty sound, unpracticed after months of misery. Parker Yates looked pleased at having provoked it. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the communal dining area where people were beginning to gather. "Maria will never forgive me if I keep you from supper. She's taken quite a shine to you." They walked side by side through the mission compound, close but not touching, each acutely aware of the other's presence. For Olivia, it was a novel sensation being near a man without fear, feeling something stir within her that she'd thought had died in the Whiskey Rose. Supper was a communal affair, with mission residents gathered around long tables laden with simple but hearty fare. Olivia found herself seated between Maria and a young Apache woman who introduced herself as Nita. Yates sat across from them, occasionally joining the conversation but mostly observing with the watchful eyes of a man accustomed to reading people and situations. As the meal progressed, Olivia began to relax, drawn into Maria's stories of life at the mission and Nita's quiet explanations of Apache customs. It felt good to laugh, to listen, to be treated as a person worthy of respect rather than an object of entertainment or desire. When she glanced up to find Yates watching her, a curious warmth spread through her chest. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her wonder if he was seeing her, truly seeing her in a way no one had in a very long time. After the meal, as twilight deepened into night, Olivia found herself walking with Yates along the perimeter of the mission. Torches illuminated the central compound, but here in the shadows, they were alone with the vast Arizona sky arching overhead, brilliant with stars. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed, tilting her head back to take in the celestial display. "I've never seen so many stars." "One thing about the territory," Yates agreed, his voice low. "The skies are something to behold." They stopped by a section of adobe wall, leaning against it as they gazed upward. The night was cool but not cold, with the lingering warmth of the day still radiating from the earth. "Tell me about Missouri," Yates said unexpectedly. "What was your life like before?" "Before everything went wrong," Olivia supplied when he trailed off. She sighed, conjuring images of the life she'd lost. "We had a small farm near Jefferson City. Nothing grand, 40 acres, a few cows, some chickens. My father grew wheat and corn, and my mother kept a vegetable garden. I helped with both." "You were happy." "We were," she confirmed, a bittersweet ache filling her chest. "It wasn't an easy life, but it was good. Then the fever came through last autumn. It took both my parents within a week of each other." Yates was silent, but she could feel his attention, steady and unwavering. "I tried to keep the farm going," she continued, "but there were debts I didn't know about. The bank foreclosed in February. I had nowhere to go, no relatives to take me in. When Mr. Thornton came through town talking about opportunities for respectable young women in the Arizona territory, it seemed like Providence. Thornton recruited you himself? Yates asked, his tone sharpening. Olivia nodded. He makes trips east several times a year, he said. Looking for fresh talent is how he put it, though he told me I'd be serving drinks and keeping the books, nothing more. She gave a bitter laugh. By the time I realized what kind of establishment the Whiskey Rose really was, we were halfway across the country, and he'd already taken my travel money for safekeeping. How many others? Yates asked quietly. 3 that I know of. There was a girl from Kentucky who arrived a month before me. She didn't last, tried to run, and Thornton made an example of her. Olivia shuddered at the memory. 2 more came after me, young girls not even 20. Yates's jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath the skin. Sounds like Thornton's running a trafficking operation. The territorial governor's been trying to crack down on that kind of business. Will you go after him? Olivia asked. It's not my jurisdiction, Yates admitted reluctantly, but I know people who can make his life difficult. And if our paths cross again? He left the thought unfinished, but his meaning was clear. They fell silent, each lost in thought as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its lonely wail echoing across the valley. What about you? Olivia finally asked. How does a man become a U.S. Marshal in the Arizona Territory? Yates shifted, uncomfortable with being the subject of conversation. Not much to tell. I grew up in Texas near El Paso. My father was a rancher until Apaches raided our spread in '65. He was killed, along with my older brother. I'm sorry, Olivia said softly. He shrugged. It was a long time ago. My mother took me east after that to live with her family in Pennsylvania, but the West was in my blood. As soon as I turned 18, I headed back. Rode with the Texas Rangers for a few years, then took the Marshal's badge when they formed the Arizona Territory. And you've been chasing outlaws ever since, more or less. His voice held a weariness that suggested the job had taken its toll. It's not the life I would have chosen as a boy, but it's the one I'm suited for. What would you have chosen? Olivia asked, genuinely curious. Yates was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was softer, tinged with a vulnerability that tugged at something deep within her. A ranch of my own, he admitted. Good land with water rights, cattle, horses, maybe some crops, a place where a man could put down roots and build something that would last. That sounds lovely, Olivia said, thinking of her family's farm not with the pain that usually accompanied such memories, but with a gentler nostalgia. Will you ever do it? Maybe someday, he said, but his tone suggested he didn't truly believe it. When I've put away enough outlaws to make the territory safe for decent folks. An impossible task, Olivia thought but didn't say. There would always be more outlaws, more danger. The West was too vast, too untamed to ever be truly safe. As if reading her thoughts, Yates straightened from the wall. It's getting late. You should rest. I'll be leaving before dawn. The reminder of his imminent departure sent a pang through Olivia's chest. Yes, of course. They walked back toward the women's quarters in companionable silence. At the doorway, Olivia turned to face him, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye, even for a short time. Thank you, she said, meeting his eyes in the torchlight. Not just for rescuing me, but for treating me like a person worth saving. Something flickered in Yates's expression, a warmth that momentarily banished the habitual vigilance from his features. You are worth saving, Olivia Grayson, he said quietly. Don't ever doubt that. Before she could respond, he reached out and with surprising gentleness brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The brief contact sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. I'll come back in a week, he promised. Maybe 2 if there's trouble at the fort, but I will come back. Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Yates held her gaze a moment longer, then stepped back, tipping his hat in a gesture that managed to be both formal and oddly intimate. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Yates," she replied, watching as he turned and walked away, his tall figure gradually swallowed by the darkness. Only after she had retreated to her small room did Olivia realize that for the first time since leaving Missouri, she was looking forward to tomorrow and the days that would follow. It was a strange feeling hope, she decided. After so long without it, hope felt like coming home. True to his word, Yates was gone by the time Olivia awoke the next morning. Father Thomas informed her at breakfast that the marshal had left at first light, but not before extracting a promise that she would be well cared for in his absence. "He seemed quite concerned for your welfare," the priest remarked with a twinkle in his eye that suggested he saw more than he let on. "Marshal Parker is not typically one to show such personal interest in those he helps." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind," she said neutrally, focusing on her bowl of corn porridge. "Indeed," Father Thomas said, his tone mild. "Well, he asked that I tell you he would return as promised. In the meantime, Maria has suggested that you might help in the kitchen and with the children's lessons if you're agreeable." "Of course," Olivia replied eagerly. After months of enforced idleness and degradation at the Whiskey Rose, the prospect of useful work was appealing. "I'd be happy to earn my keep." The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Olivia rose with the sun, helping Maria prepare breakfast for the mission's residents. Mornings were spent teaching basic reading and arithmetic to the settlement's children, a mix of Mexican, white, and Apache youngsters, who initially regarded her with curiosity, but soon accepted her as part of their community. Afternoons were devoted to kitchen work, or helping with the endless mending required by a settlement of nearly 50 people. In the evenings, she often sat with the women, learning to weave baskets in the Apache style from Nita, or listening to Maria's stories of life in Sonora before she had come north. It was a simple existence, but after what she had endured, simplicity felt like luxury. Here, no one leered at her or made crude suggestions. No one fired bullets at her feet to make her dance faster. No one touched her without permission or treated her as less than human. Yet despite the peace she found at San Miguel, Olivia couldn't help counting the days until Yates's promised return. Each morning, she found her eyes drawn to the eastern trail, watching for a familiar figure on a buckskin horse. Each night, she fell asleep thinking of gray eyes and a voice that had promised she would only dance for joy. A week passed, then 10 days. Olivia told herself not to worry. He had said it might be 2 weeks if there was trouble at the fort. Still, anxiety gnawed at her. What if something had happened to him? What if he had simply changed his mind about returning on the morning of the 12th day? As Olivia was hanging laundry to dry in the bright sunshine, a shout went up from one of the children keeping watch at the mission's perimeter. "Riders coming." 3 men from the east, her heart leapt, then immediately sank as she realized there were 3 travelers, not one. Abandoning the laundry, she hurried to the main gate where Father Thomas and several others had already gathered. The approaching riders were still some distance away, dust billowing from their horses' hooves as they made their way down the trail from the direction of Fort Apache. As they drew nearer, Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The lead rider, tall in the saddle atop a buckskin gelding, was unmistakably Yates. Relief flooded through her, so intense that she had to steady herself against the adobe wall. He had come back as promised. But who were the others? The answer became apparent as the trio reached the mission gates. Flanking Yates were 2 soldiers in the blue uniforms of the U.S. Cavalry, one a grizzled sergeant with a magnificent mustache, the other a younger man who looked barely old enough to shave. "Father Thomas," Yates greeted the priest as he dismounted. "I apologize for the unexpected guests. Sergeant Miller and Private Jenkins are escorting me back to Springerville on official business." Only then did his eyes find Olivia, standing slightly apart from the others. Something in his expression softened, a silent message passing between them that made her heart beat faster. "Miss Grayson," he said, his tone formal but his eyes warming, "you're looking well." "As are you, Marshal Parker," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten us." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not likely." Father Thomas, ever the gracious host, invited the new arrivals to refresh themselves and join the mission residents for the midday meal. As the soldiers gratefully accepted, leading their horses toward the stables, Yates hung back, falling into step beside Olivia. "I need to speak with you," he said in a low voice. "Privately, if possible." Alarm flickered through her. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," he hedged. "But there have been developments in Springerville that you should know about." Olivia's stomach tightened with apprehension, but she nodded. "The garden behind the chapel is usually quiet this time of day." They made their way there, maintaining a respectable distance between them as they crossed the busy courtyard. The garden was a small oasis of green in the arid landscape, featuring native plants that could survive with minimal water. A wooden bench sat beneath the shade of a gnarled mesquite tree, offering privacy from prying eyes. As soon as they were seated, Yates removed his hat, running a hand through hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in days. Up close, Olivia could see the fatigue etched in the lines around his eyes and the stubble darkening his jaw. "You look tired," she observed. "Was there trouble at the fort?" "Nothing unexpected," he replied. "It's what happened after that's brought me back sooner than I planned." He hesitated, clearly weighing his next words carefully. "Thornton's dead." The blunt statement hit Olivia like a physical blow. "Dead? How?" "Shot in the back outside his saloon 3 nights ago," Yates said. "The local sheriff suspects it was a dispute over gambling debts, but there's more to it than that." "What do you mean?" Yates leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Before he died, Thornton started talking about girls he'd brought west, about men who paid him to find certain types of young women. He implicated some influential people in Springerville and beyond." Olivia felt sick. "The other girls at the Whiskey Rose are safe," Yates assured her quickly. "The sheriff took them into protective custody after Thornton's murder. But there's concern that whoever killed him might be trying to silence potential witnesses." Understanding dawned. "And since I was there, you might be in danger," Yates finished grimly. "That's why I've come back with an escort. The territorial prosecutor wants to talk to you and the other girls. Your testimony could help bring down a trafficking network that stretches from here to St. Louis." Olivia's mind reeled. The prospect of returning to Springerville filled her with dread, but the thought of other young women being lured into the same trap she had fallen into was worse. "What if I refuse?" she asked, already knowing she wouldn't. "Then we ride back without you," Yates said simply. "I won't force you, Olivia. No one will ever force you to do anything again if I have any say in the matter." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest, despite the gravity of the situation. "But you think I should go?" He nodded slowly. "I think your testimony could save lives, and—" He hesitated, then met her eyes directly. "I think facing Springerville again might help you put the past behind you once and for all." Olivia took a deep breath, considering. The thought of returning to the town where she had suffered so much was terrifying. But Yates would be with her. And he was right if her words could prevent other women from enduring what she had. Didn't she have a duty to speak? When would we leave? Tomorrow morning, he replied. I've arranged for a wagon so you won't have to ride behind me again. A faint smile touched his lips. Though Thunder was disappointed, he's taken quite a shine to you. Just Thunder. The words slipped out before Olivia could stop them, more forward than she had intended. Yates looked momentarily startled, then something shifted in his expression, a dropping of the professional mask he wore so carefully, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath. Not just Thunder, he admitted quietly. I thought about you every day at the fort. I wondered if you were settling in here, if you were happy, if you were thinking of me too. The simple honesty of his words caught Olivia off guard. In her experience, men didn't speak so plainly about their feelings, especially not men like Yates Parker, who lived by their wits and their guns in a dangerous world. I was, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Thinking of you, I mean. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Yates cleared his throat and replaced his hat, breaking the spell. We should get back, he said, rising from the bench. Sergeant Miller will think I've deserted if we're gone too long. Olivia stood as well, smoothing her skirts with suddenly trembling hands. Yes, of course, and I should tell Father Thomas and Maria that I'll be leaving tomorrow. They walked back toward the mission buildings side by side, close enough that their hands occasionally brushed, sending jolts of awareness through Olivia each time. It was a novel sensation, this mixture of trepidation and anticipation, fear for what awaited her in Springerville balanced against the growing certainty that whatever came next, Yates Parker would be by her side. For now, that was enough. The journey to Springerville took the better part of a day, with Olivia riding in the small wagon driven by Private Jenkins while Yates and Sergeant Miller flanked them on horseback. The young soldier proved to be a talkative companion, sharing stories of life at Fort Apache that helped distract Olivia from her growing anxiety as they drew closer to their destination. The marshal hardly slept while he was at the fort, Jenkins confided at one point, lowering his voice though Yates was riding well ahead of them. Soon as he heard about what happened in Springerville, he was like a man possessed. Convinced the colonel to assign us as escort before the ink was dry on his orders. Olivia glanced ahead at Yates's straight back, wondering at the intensity of his concern for her safety. Was it merely professional duty, or something more personal? The question lingered in her mind as the familiar outline of Springerville appeared on the horizon. The town looked unchanged, the same dusty Main Street, the same false-fronted buildings, the same hitching posts and water troughs. Yet Olivia's perspective had shifted dramatically. What had once seemed like a prison now appeared merely shabby and small, its power to terrify diminished by the presence of the man riding beside the wagon. They headed directly for the sheriff's office, a squat building of weathered wood with a sign declaring it the domain of Sheriff James Holbrook, Springerville, Arizona Territory. Yates dismounted first, coming to help Olivia down from the wagon with a reassuring squeeze of her hand. "You ready for this?" he asked quietly. She nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "As I'll ever be." The interior of the sheriff's office was surprisingly cool and clean, with wanted posters neatly arranged on one wall and a massive oak desk dominating the small space. Behind it sat a man Olivia guessed to be in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He rose as they entered, extending a hand to Yates. "Marshal Parker. Good to see you made it back safe." His eyes shifted to Olivia. "This must be Miss Grayson. I'm Sheriff Holbrook, madam. Appreciate you coming all this way to help us sort out this mess." "Where are the other girls?" Yates asked, getting straight to business. "Staying with the doc's wife," Holbrook replied. "Seemed safest given the circumstances. The prosecutor from Tucson arrived yesterday. He's over at the hotel going through Thornton's papers. Man kept meticulous records of his business dealings." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Makes my skin crawl to think this was happening right under my nose and I didn't see it." "Thornton was careful," Yates observed. "And well connected, from what I hear." "That he was," Holbrook agreed grimly. "Which is why Miss Grayson's testimony is so important. We need to know who was involved, particularly anyone who might have had reason to want Thornton silenced." Olivia swallowed hard. "I'll tell you what I know, though it's not much. Thornton kept his business dealings private, even from us girls." The sheriff nodded understandingly. "Anything you can remember might help, but first, let's get you settled. I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Simmons's boarding house, respectable place, other side of town from the Whiskey Rose." "I'll escort her there," Yates said, in a tone that brooked no argument. Holbrook raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "Fine by me. The prosecutor wants to meet with all the witnesses tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock at my office, if that suits." With arrangements made, Yates and Olivia left the sheriff's office, the soldiers having been dismissed to find accommodations at the livery stable. As they walked through town, Olivia was acutely aware of curious eyes following them. Springerville was small enough that news traveled fast, and her return in the company of a U.S. Marshal would certainly have set tongues wagging. "Keep your head high," Yates murmured, sensing her discomfort. "You've done nothing wrong." His words bolstered her courage as they made their way to the boarding house, a well-maintained two-story structure with a small garden out front, worlds apart from the gaudy facade of the Whiskey Rose. Mrs. Simmons herself answered the door, a plump, pleasant-faced woman who ushered them in with brisk efficiency. "I've put you in the back room, dear," she told Olivia. "Quietest spot in the house with a nice view of the garden. Marshal, Sheriff Holbrook said to tell you there's a room for you as well if you want it." Yates nodded his thanks. "I'll be staying close by," he told Olivia. "If you need anything, just send word." Mrs. Simmons showed Olivia to her room, which was indeed quiet and pleasant, with simple but comfortable furnishings and windows that opened onto a small kitchen garden. After the older woman left, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, overcome by the strangeness of being back in Springerville, but as a guest rather than a captive. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Yates standing there, hat in hand. "I wanted to make sure you were settled before I check in with the prosecutor," he said, "and to ask if you join me for supper later. The dining room downstairs is supposed to be decent." Olivia smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I'd like that, thank you." He nodded, seemingly on the verge of saying something more, then thought better of it. "I'll come by around 6 then." After he left, Olivia unpacked the few belongings she'd brought from San Miguel, including a new dress. Maria had insisted she take a simple but pretty gown of deep blue calico that was far more respectable than anything she'd worn at the Whiskey Rose. She laid it out for the evening, then spent some time freshening up with the basin and pitcher provided. As the appointed hour approached, Olivia found herself unusually nervous. It was foolish, she told herself. This was hardly a social call, just two people sharing a meal before a difficult day tomorrow. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach as she smoothed her hair and adjusted the collar of her dress. Yates arrived promptly at 6, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt beneath his usual vest and coat. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, a reaction that sent a warm glow of pleasure through Olivia. "You look nice," he said simply. "Thank you." She felt herself blushing, unaccustomed to straightforward compliments. "Maria made the dress for me." "It suits you," he observed as they made their way downstairs. The dining room was small but cozy, with checkered tablecloths and kerosene lamps casting a warm glow over the half-dozen tables. Only two were occupied, one by an elderly couple, the other by a man Olivia guessed to be a traveling salesman based on the sample case at his feet. Mrs. Simmons herself served them, placing bowls of fragrant stew and a basket of fresh bread on the table before discreetly withdrawing. For a few minutes they ate in companionable silence, both hungrier than they'd realized after the day's journey. "How did your meeting with the prosecutor go?" Olivia finally asked. Yates finished a bite before answering. "Productive. He's building a solid case against several prominent men in the territory based on Thornton's records and what the other girls have told him." "Do they know who killed Thornton?" "Not yet," he admitted. "But they have suspicions. A man named Blackwood, Julian Blackwood." Olivia interrupted, her spoon clattering against the bowl. Yates's eyes sharpened. "You know him?" "Not personally," she said quickly. "But Thornton mentioned him several times. He was a special customer, one who paid extra for private performances." Yates's expression darkened. "Did he ever?" He left the question unfinished, but his meaning was clear. "No," Olivia assured him, touched by his concern. "I never met him. Thornton said he was waiting for a special occasion to introduce us." She shuddered at the memory. From the way he talked, this Blackwood has powerful friends. "That matches what the prosecutor told me," Yates said grimly. "Blackwood's involved in mining operations all over the territory, has the ear of politicians in Tucson and even Washington. If he's implicated in Thornton's trafficking business, it would explain why someone wanted Thornton silenced," Olivia finished. They continued their meal in thoughtful silence, the implications of what they had discussed hanging in the air between them. Outside, darkness had fallen, and the sounds of Springerville's nightlife began to filter through the windows. Piano music from the saloons, the occasional shout or burst of laughter. "Will you be all right tonight?" Yates asked as they finished eating. "I can stand watch outside your door if you'd feel safer." The offer was tempting, not only for the security it offered but for the simple comfort of knowing he was near. But Olivia shook her head. "I'll be fine," she assured him with more confidence than she felt. "Mrs. Simmons doesn't seem the type to allow any disturbances in her establishment." Yates smiled slightly. "No, she doesn't. Still, I'm just down the hall if you need anything, and I'm a light sleeper." As they rose from the table, he hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small Derringer pistol. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "Just in case." Olivia stared at the weapon, its weight both foreign and strangely comforting. "I've never fired a gun before." "It's simple enough," Yates explained quietly. "Just point and pull the trigger, but having it might help you rest easier." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the pistol, and once again that current of awareness passed between them. Olivia found herself looking up into gray eyes that held concern, respect, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for everything." Yates nodded, his gaze holding hers for a long moment before he stepped back. "Good night, Olivia. I'll see you in the morning." "Good night, Yates." In her room, Olivia placed the Derringer on the bedside table within easy reach. Then she undressed, blew out the lamp, and slipped beneath the covers, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. Sleep was elusive, her mind too full of the day's events and apprehension about tomorrow's testimony. She found herself thinking of Yates, just down the hall, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way he looked at her as if he was seeing something valuable and worthy of protection. It was a dangerous line of thought, Men like Yates Parker didn't settle down with women like her women with pasts, with scars both visible and hidden. His life was on the trail, bringing outlaws to justice. And yet he had come back for her, had worried about her while at Fort Apache, had looked at her tonight in a way that suggested she might matter to him as more than just another person in need of his professional protection. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Olivia eventually drifted into an uneasy slumber, the small derringer a reassuring presence beside her. She awoke with a start some hours later, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. Something had disturbed her sleep a sound, perhaps, though now the boarding house was quiet save for the normal creaks and groans of an old building. Sitting up, Olivia strained her ears, trying to identify what had awakened her. For several long moments, she heard nothing. Then, just as she was beginning to think she'd imagined it, there came the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her door, stealthy, cautious footsteps that suggested someone trying very hard not to be heard. Olivia's heart began to pound. It could be another boarder, she told herself, or Mrs. Simmons checking on something, but instinct told her otherwise. Moving as silently as possible, she reached for the derringer, her fingers closing around its handle just as the doorknob began to turn, slowly and deliberately. The door was locked, she had made sure of that before retiring. But as the handle continued to move, she heard the scrape of metal against metal, someone trying to pick the lock. Terror flooded through her, but with it came a surge of determination. She was not at the Whiskey Rose anymore. She was not helpless, slipping from the bed. Olivia positioned herself beside the door, the derringer held tightly in both hands. Through the window, a sliver of moonlight provided just enough illumination to see by. The lock gave with a soft click. The door began to open, inch by agonizing inch. Olivia held her breath, finger on the trigger as Yates had shown her. A figure slipped into the room, a man, his face obscured by the shadow of a hat pulled low. He took one step, then another, moving toward the bed where he clearly expected to find her sleeping. "Don't move," Olivia said, her voice steadier than she would have thought possible. "I'm armed." The intruder froze, then whirled toward her with startling speed. Moonlight glinted on the barrel of a revolver. Olivia didn't think she fired. The derringer's report was deafening in the confined space, the recoil jarring her wrist. The intruder staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he lunged toward her with a snarled curse. Crying out in alarm, Olivia dodged to the side, but the room was small, and there was nowhere to run. The man's hand closed around her arm, yanking her toward him. She could smell whiskey and tobacco on his breath as he raised his gun. "You'll pay for that, girl," he growled. Before he could fire, the door burst open again and a second figure barreled into the room. Yates. Even in the dim light, Olivia would know his silhouette anywhere. The intruder spun to face the new threat, but Yates was faster. His fist connected with the man's jaw with a sickening crack, sending him reeling backward. The revolver discharged, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as the weapon fell from the intruder's hand. What followed was a brief but violent struggle, two men locked in combat in the cramped confines of the room, grunting with effort as they exchanged blows. Yates fought with the controlled precision of a man accustomed to violence, each movement deliberate and effective. Within moments, he had the intruder pinned face down on the floor, one knee in the small of his back as he wrenched the man's arms behind him. "Are you hurt?" he asked Olivia, his voice tight with concern. "No," she managed, though her entire body was trembling with reaction. "No, I'm all right." By now, the commotion had roused the entire boarding house. Mrs. Simmons appeared in the doorway, lamp in hand, her nightcap slightly askew. "Good Lord!" she exclaimed. "What in heaven's name is happening here?" "This man broke into Miss Grayson's room," Yates explained grimly. "I need rope to secure him, and someone needs to fetch Sheriff Holbrook." The next hour passed in a blur for Olivia. The intruder was identified as one of Blackwood's men, a hired gun named Reddick with a reputation for doing the dirty work his employer preferred not to handle personally. Sheriff Holbrook arrived, took statements from both Olivia and Yates, and hauled the sullen, bleeding Reddick off to jail. Through it all, Yates remained at Olivia's side, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. Only when the sheriff and the curious onlookers had departed, and Mrs. Simmons had reluctantly returned to her own quarters, did he allow his professional demeanor to slip. "I should never have left you alone," he said, his voice rough with self-recrimination. "I knew there was danger and still Stop," Olivia interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. "You couldn't have known they would move so quickly, and I wasn't alone." She nodded toward the Derringer, now lying on the bureau. "You made sure of that." Yates covered her hand with his own, his fingers warm and calloused. "You were brave," he said softly. "Most people would have panicked, but you kept your head." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I refused to be a victim again, not after everything." Her voice faltered, and suddenly the delayed shock of what had happened hit her full force. She began to tremble, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. Yates saw it happening and guided her to the edge of the bed, sitting beside her with his arm around her shoulders. "It's all right," he murmured. "The danger's past. You're safe now." Olivia turned her face into his shoulder, seeking comfort in his warmth and solidity as reaction overwhelmed her. Yates held her close, one hand stroking her hair with surprising gentleness for a man whose life was defined by violence. "I won't leave you alone again," he promised. "Not until this is over." Gradually, Olivia's trembling subsided, though she made no move to pull away from his embrace. It felt right, being held by him as if she had found a place of safety after a lifetime of searching. "You should try to rest," Yates said eventually, though he sounded reluctant. "Tomorrow will be difficult enough without exhaustion added to it." Olivia knew he was right, but the thought of being alone in the room where she had nearly died made her stomach clench with fear. "Would you?" She began, then hesitated, unsure how to ask for what she needed. Yates seemed to understand without words. "I'll stay," he said simply. "Right here in this chair." He nodded toward the wooden rocker in the corner. "I won't leave, Olivia, I promise." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you." With the security of his presence, Olivia was able to return to bed, though she left the lamp burning low. Yates settled in the rocking chair, his revolver across his lap, watchful and alert despite the late hour. Just before sleep claimed her, Olivia murmured, "How did you know?" That something was wrong. In the dim light, she saw Yates's mouth curve into a slight smile. "I told you I'm a light sleeper, and I've learned to trust my instincts. Something didn't feel right, so I was already awake when I heard the shot." "I'm glad," Olivia said softly, "that you were here. That you came back for me." As she drifted into sleep, she thought she heard him reply, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "I'll always come back for you, Olivia. Always." The prosecutor from Tucson was a surprisingly young man named Edward Whiting, barely 30, with spectacles and the earnest demeanor of someone who believed fervently in justice. He met with Olivia the next morning in Sheriff Holbrook's office, taking her statement with patient thoroughness. Yates remained at her side throughout, his presence lending her the strength to recount the humiliations she had endured at the Whiskey Rose. When she spoke of how Thornton had recruited her with false promises, of the special customers who paid extra for private dances, of the threats and violence used to ensure compliance, the prosecutor's expression grew increasingly grave. "Miss Grayson," Whiting said when she had finished. "Your testimony corroborates what the other young women have told us and what we found in Thornton's records. I believe we have enough evidence to bring charges against several influential men, including Julian Blackwood." "The attack on Miss Grayson last night confirms Blackwood's involvement," Yates added. "Reddick is known to work exclusively for him." "Indeed." Whiting removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief. "Which brings me to a difficult request, Miss Grayson. We need you to testify at the territorial court in Tucson. Your first-hand account would be compelling." Olivia's heart sank. She had hoped that giving her statement would be the end of it, that she could put Springerville and all its painful memories behind her. The thought of recounting her experiences in a public courtroom, facing the men who had exploited her, was almost unbearable. "How soon?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The circuit judge arrives in Tucson next month," Whiting replied. "The trial would likely begin shortly thereafter." A month. 4 weeks to prepare herself to relive the worst period of her life in front of strangers. "She'll need protection," Yates said, his voice hard. "Blackwood's already tried once to silence her. He won't stop there." Whiting nodded. "The territorial governor is taking a personal interest in this case. He's authorized protective custody for all witnesses until the trial concludes." "And afterward?" Olivia asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since the previous night's attack. "What happens when the trial is over? Will Blackwood's men still be hunting me?" It was a question neither man seemed prepared to answer. Whiting looked uncomfortable, while Yates's expression turned thoughtful. "That depends on the outcome of the trial," the prosecutor finally said. "If Blackwood is convicted, his network will likely fall apart." "And if he isn't?" Olivia pressed. "Let's cross that bridge when we come to it," Yates interjected. "For now, the immediate concern is keeping you safe until the trial." After further discussion of logistics, it was agreed that Olivia would travel to Tucson under escort the following day. She would be housed in a secure location known only to the prosecutor and those directly involved in her protection. As they left the sheriff's office, Olivia felt drained, the weight of what lay ahead settling over her like a shroud. Yates, sensing her mood, suggested they walk to the edge of town where there would be fewer prying eyes and curious onlookers. They followed the main street to where it petered out into the desert, the vast expanse of the Arizona territory stretching before them, rugged mountains in the distance, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the cloudless sky. "It's so beautiful," Olivia murmured, shading her eyes against the sun, "and so harsh, like everything out here." Yates stood beside her, his hat pulled low to shield his face. "It grows on you," he said. "The vastness of it, the freedom." They were silent for a moment, each lost in private thoughts. Then Olivia turned to him, voicing the question that had been haunting her since the meeting with the prosecutor. "What happens after the trial, Yates? Where do I go? What do I do?" He considered her questions with the seriousness they deserved. "What do you want to do?" It was something no one had asked her in a very long time, not since before her parents died, before her life had spiraled beyond her control. What did she want? "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to Missouri. There's nothing for me there. And I can't stay in Springerville, not after everything that's happened." "You could return to San Miguel," Yates suggested. "Father Thomas would welcome you. You seem to be finding your place there." Olivia nodded slowly. The mission had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most, and she had been content there. But something held her back from embracing it as a permanent solution. "I could," she agreed, "but it feels like hiding, like letting Thornton and Blackwood win in a way." Yates's eyes warmed with approval. "Then what would you choose if you could choose anything?" The question was both liberating and terrifying. For so long, Olivia had been focused merely on surviving, on enduring one day at a time. The concept of building a real future of her own choosing, was almost too much to contemplate. "I think," she said hesitantly, "I'd like to help others. Girls like me, who have been deceived and exploited. There must be so many of them out here, far from home, with nowhere to turn." A smile touched Yates's lips, not the guarded half-smile she was accustomed to, but something fuller, reaching his eyes and transforming his weathered features. "You're a remarkable woman, Olivia Grayson," he said softly. Heat rose in her cheeks at the simple compliment. "I'm just trying to make something good come from all this. That's what makes you remarkable." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious once more. "I've been thinking about what comes next too, about my life, the choices I've made." Olivia's heart beat a little faster at the intensity in his gaze. And I've realized some things these past few weeks." He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "This badge," he touched the silver star pinned to his vest, "it's been my whole life for years now. Tracking outlaws, bringing them to justice. I thought it was enough." "Isn't it?" Olivia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Yates shook his head slowly. "Not anymore, maybe it never was." His eyes held hers, steady and unwavering. "Meeting you has made me remember things I thought I'd forgotten, things I want." The directness of his gaze made Olivia's breath catch. "What things?" "A home," he said simply. "A place to belong, someone to belong to." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Olivia hardly dared to hope that he was saying what she thought he was saying. "Yates, I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted gently. "Not now, not with everything that's happening. I just wanted you to know that I see a future beyond the badge. And if you wanted to be part of that future someday, when all this is over." He trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. Olivia's heart felt too full for her chest. This man who had rescued her from a living hell, who had protected her and respected her, and treated her with a dignity she had thought lost forever, this man was offering her a place in his future. It seemed too much to hope for, and yet— "I would like that," she said softly. "Very much." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the desert, transformative, illuminating. He reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that felt more intimate than any touch she had known before. "When this is over," he promised, "when Blackwood is behind bars and you're truly safe, we'll talk about what comes next, together." In that moment, standing at the edge of Springerville with her hand in his, Olivia believed that there could be a future beyond the pain of her past, a future where she might dance for joy, just as Yates had promised on that first night. The journey to Tucson was long and dusty, with Olivia traveling in a covered wagon under the protection of Yates and 2 deputies assigned by the territorial governor. To avoid drawing attention, they took a circuitous route, staying at remote ranches and way stations rather than the more populous settlements. During those days on the trail, a fragile peace settled over Olivia. The farther they got from Springerville, the more the iron bands around her chest seemed to loosen, allowing her to breathe freely for the first time in months. Though the threat of Blackwood's retribution still hung over her, the immediate danger felt more distant with each mile they traveled. And then there was Yates. Since their conversation at the edge of town, something had shifted between them, a barrier lifted, a new understanding taking root. They didn't speak again of the future he had hinted at, both tacitly agreeing that such discussions should wait until after the trial. But in 100 small ways, they grew closer, sharing meals around the campfire, talking late into the evening about books they had read and places they had seen, learning the contours of each other's lives. Olivia found herself captivated by the glimpses of the man behind the marshal's badge, the dry humor that emerged when he was truly at ease, the unexpected gentleness in hands that had taken down some of the territory's most dangerous outlaws, the way he listened to her, as if her thoughts and opinions mattered. By the time they reached Tucson, Olivia knew with unshakable certainty that she was falling in love with Yates Parker. The realization should have terrified her, given everything she had endured, but instead it felt like coming home after a long, dark journey. Tucson was larger and more developed than Springerville, with substantial brick buildings lining the main streets and a bustling commerce that spoke of the territory's growing prosperity. Olivia was settled in a small but comfortable house on the outskirts of town, its location known only to the prosecutor, the deputies assigned to guard it, and Yates himself. The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a blur of preparation. Prosecutor Whiting visited regularly, coaching Olivia on what to expect in the courtroom, helping her organize her testimony for maximum impact. The other girls from the Whiskey Rose were housed elsewhere in the city, their statements corroborating Olivia's account of Thornton's operation. Throughout it all, Yates remained a constant presence, sometimes in an official capacity, conferring with the deputies or escorting Whiting to and from his meetings with Olivia, but more often simply being there, a steady anchor in the storm of uncertainty. The night before the trial was set to begin, Olivia found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with anxiety about what lay ahead. She slipped out onto the small porch of the safe house, wrapped in a shawl against the desert night's chill. To her surprise, Yates was already there, seated on the top step, his profile etched against the starlit sky. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked as she settled beside him. "No," she admitted. "I keep thinking about tomorrow, about facing Blackwood in that courtroom." Yates nodded, understanding. "It won't be easy," he acknowledged. "But you're stronger than you know, Olivia, and you won't be facing him alone." The simple assurance warmed her more than any elaborate promises could have done. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the night air carrying the scent of creosote and distant rain. "I've been thinking," Yates said finally, "about what you said in Springerville, about wanting to help other girls like yourself." "Yes," Olivia prompted when he paused. "There's a place about 50 miles east of here. Good land with water writes a creek that runs year-round, even in the dry season. It was a ranch once, before the old owner died without heirs. It's been sitting abandoned for a couple of years now." Olivia's heart quickened as she began to understand where he was leading. "You've seen this place?" Yates nodded. "Rode past it many times, always thought it had potential." He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the starlight. "It could be a refuge. A place where women with nowhere else to go could find safety, learn skills, start over." "That sounds wonderful," Olivia said softly, touched by how closely he had been listening to her dreams. "But such a place would require money, resources." "I have savings," Yates said. "Not a fortune, but enough for a start. And there are people in the territory who would support such a venture, decent people who want to see an end to operations like Thornton's." Hope fluttered in Olivia's chest, not just for herself, but for all the women who might find in such a place the second chance that had been offered to her. "You would do that?" she asked. "Help create something like that?" Yates's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and sure. "With the right partner," he said quietly. "Someone who understands what these women have been through, someone with the courage to build something new from the ashes of the past." The invitation in his words was unmistakable. Olivia turned her hand in his, their palms pressing together, a silent acknowledgement of shared purpose, shared future. "After the trial," she said, echoing the promise they had made in Springerville, "when this is over." Yates lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "After the trial," he agreed. "For now, try to rest. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without exhaustion added to it." With renewed hope, Olivia returned to her bed, and this time sleep came more easily, carrying her into dreams not of the past's darkness but of the future's promise. The territorial courthouse in Tucson was an imposing structure of red brick, with white columns flanking the entrance, a deliberate echo of Eastern architecture meant to convey the dignity of the law in this still wild land. As Olivia ascended the steps, Yates at her side, she felt the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her shoulders. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators. The trial of Julian Blackwood, one of the territory's wealthiest men, on charges of human trafficking, had drawn considerable attention. Olivia kept her eyes fixed straight ahead as Yates escorted her to the front of the room, where Prosecutor Whiting waited with the other witnesses. Among them were the girls from the Whiskey Rose Saloon, barely 19, with haunted eyes that had seen too much. Maria Elena, a Mexican girl who had been lured north with promises of legitimate work, and Beth, the oldest at 23, whose quiet dignity reminded Olivia of her own mother. They exchanged small smiles of recognition and solidarity before Whiting directed them to their seats. As Olivia settled in, her gaze was drawn inevitably to the defense table, where Julian Blackwood sat beside his attorney. He was not what she had expected. Instead of the monstrous figure her imagination had conjured, she saw a well-dressed man in his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. As if sensing her scrutiny, he looked up, his cold eyes meeting hers across the room. Olivia refused to look away, drawing strength from Yates's solid presence beside her. Blackwood's lips curved in a slight smile that sent a chill down her spine, but before he could intimidate her further, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Franklin Delaney was a formidable presence, a former Army officer with a reputation for impartiality and a deep knowledge of the law. He listened attentively as Whiting outlined the prosecution's case, detailing the network of trafficking and exploitation that Thornton had operated with Blackwood's financial backing and protection. The defense attorney, a slick Easterner named Harrington, countered with claims that his client had been unaware of Thornton's illegal activities and had merely invested in what he believed to be a legitimate entertainment establishment. As the trial proceeded, each of the young women was called to testify. Olivia watched with a mixture of pride and sorrow as they recounted their experiences, the deception that had brought them west, the conditions at the Whiskey Rose, the threats and violence used to keep them compliant. When her own turn came, Olivia approached the witness stand with her head high, conscious of the eyes following her progress across the courtroom. After being sworn in, she faced Prosecutor Whiting, drawing a deep breath to steady her nerves. "Miss Grayson," Whiting began, "please tell the court how you came to be at the Whiskey Rose Saloon in Springerville." In a clear, steady voice, Olivia recounted her story: her parents' deaths, the loss of the farm, Thornton's promises of respectable employment that had turned to ash the moment they reached Arizona. She described the system of debt and coercion that had kept her trapped, the degradation of being forced to dance for the entertainment of men who viewed her as less than human. "And did you ever hear the defendant, Mr. Blackwood, mentioned in connection with the Whiskey Rose?" Whiting asked. "Yes," Olivia replied, her gaze briefly meeting Blackwood's across the room. "Mr. Thornton spoke of him often. He said Mr. Blackwood was a special investor who received special consideration in return for his protection. What kind of special consideration? Private performances from the girls, Olivia said, refusing to flinch from the ugly truth. And first choice of any new girls who arrived. A murmur ran through the courtroom at this revelation. Judge Delaney rapped his gavel for silence. Did you ever personally meet the defendant? Whiting continued. No, Olivia admitted. Mr. Thornton said he was saving me for a special occasion. He said Mr. Blackwood had specific tastes and that I would suit them. Another ripple of reaction swept the gallery. Blackwood's face remained impassive, but Olivia could see a muscle working in his jaw. When it was the defense's turn for cross-examination, Harrington approached with the smooth confidence of a predator. Miss Grayson, he began, you've testified that you never actually met my client. Is that correct? Yes, Olivia confirmed. So everything you've told this court about Mr. Blackwood's alleged involvement with the Whiskey Rose is based solely on what Abraham Thornton told you. A man who, by your own admission, lied to you repeatedly and exploited you for profit. It was a clever angle of attack, and Olivia felt momentarily unbalanced. Mr. Thornton had no reason to lie about Mr. Blackwood's involvement, she countered. He spoke of it freely among the girls. Perhaps, Harrington suggested silkily, Mr. Thornton was simply using my client's name to intimidate you. After all, Mr. Blackwood is a respected businessman with considerable influence in the territory. Before Olivia could respond, Whiting was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Judge Delaney ruled. Mr. Harrington, confine yourself to questions for the witness. The cross-examination continued for nearly an hour, with Harrington attempting to undermine Olivia's credibility and paint her as a willing participant in the Whiskey Rose's activities who had only cried coercion when it suited her interests. Through it all, Olivia remained composed, refusing to be goaded into emotional outbursts that might damage her testimony. Whenever her resolve wavered, she would glance at Yates, drawing strength from his steady presence in the front row. By the time she was finally excused from the stand, Olivia was exhausted but satisfied that she had done all she could to bring Blackwood to justice. As she returned to her seat, Yates squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture that conveyed more than words could have done. The trial continued for 3 more days, with additional witnesses including former employees of the Whiskey Rose, the sheriff from Springerville, and even one of Blackwood's former associates who had turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. Throughout it all, Olivia sat with the other young women, united in their determination to see justice done. Each night, she returned to the safe house accompanied by Yates, who remained vigilant against any potential threat from Blackwood's remaining allies. On the 4th day, the jury retired to consider their verdict. The wait was excruciating hours stretching into the evening with no word from the deliberation room. Olivia paced the confines of the safe house, unable to settle, while Yates watched her with a mixture of concern and admiration. No matter what happens, he told her as darkness fell, you've shown remarkable courage. Whatever the verdict, that doesn't change. His words comforted her, but the anxiety remained. So much depended on the outcome of this trial, not just justice for what she and the others had endured, but the safety of their futures. If Blackwood walked free, none of them would ever truly be safe again. It was nearly midnight when the message came the jury had reached a verdict. Court would reconvene at 9 the following morning. Sleep was impossible. Olivia spent the night alternating between anxious pacing and sitting beside Yates on the porch, finding solace in his quiet strength as they watched the stars wheel overhead. Neither spoke much, but in the silence between them grew an understanding deeper than words. As dawn broke over Tucson, Olivia dressed with particular care in the simple but respectable blue dress that Maria had given her at San Miguel. Whatever the verdict, she would face it with dignity. The courtroom was packed when they arrived, the spectators' gallery filled to capacity with curious townsfolk, newspaper reporters, and various dignitaries. Blackwood sat at the defense table, outwardly composed but with tension evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. When Judge Delaney entered, the room fell silent. After the formalities were observed, he turned to the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied, rising to his feet. The moment stretched, time seeming to slow as the piece of paper was handed to the judge, examined, and returned to the foreman. In the matter of the territory of Arizona versus Julian Blackwood, on the charge of human trafficking and exploitation, how do you find? The foreman's voice rang clear in the hushed courtroom. "We find the defendant guilty, Your Honor." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by an outbreak of conversation that Judge Delaney quickly silenced with his gavel. Olivia sat frozen, the word guilty echoing in her ears as relief flooded through her veins. Beside her, Yates reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers in a warm, firm grip. When she turned to look at him, the pride in his eyes made her heart swell. "It's over," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "You did it, Olivia." Across the courtroom, Blackwood's carefully maintained facade crumbled as the reality of his conviction sank in. His face contorted with rage as he turned to glare at the women whose testimony had sealed his fate. But his fury held no power over Olivia now. She met his gaze steadily, without fear, secure in the knowledge that justice had been served, and that her future was once again her own to shape. Judge Delaney's voice cut through her thoughts as he pronounced sentence. 20 years in the territorial prison, the maximum allowed by law. As Blackwood was led away in chains, Olivia felt the last vestiges of her captivity fall away. She was free, truly free at last. Outside the courthouse, beneath the clear blue sky of an Arizona morning, Olivia stood with the other women from the Whiskey Rose, their shared ordeal now behind them. Prosecutor Whiting approached, his youthful face alight with satisfaction. "Ladies," he said, addressing them collectively, "your courage has done more than put one man behind bars. The territorial governor has pledged to increase efforts to combat trafficking throughout Arizona. What you've endured will help ensure that others don't suffer the same fate." It was some consolation, though Olivia knew that words and promises alone wouldn't heal the wounds they all carried. But it was a start. As the group began to disperse, Whiting drew her aside. "Miss Grayson, I've been asked to convey the governor's personal thanks for your testimony. He's also authorized a small stipend for each of you women as compensation for your cooperation with the territory's justice system." He handed her an envelope containing what felt like several banknotes. "It's not much, but perhaps it will help you make a new start." Olivia accepted the envelope with murmured thanks, though no amount of money could truly compensate for what she had lost. Still, practical considerations couldn't be ignored. Whatever future she envisioned would require resources to build. As Whiting departed, Yates approached, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "It's done," he said simply. "Blackwood is finished in the territory. His network is already crumbling. Men like that have no loyalty when the leader falls. What happens now?" Olivia asked, though the question encompassed far more than the immediate aftermath of the trial. Yates seemed to understand her meaning. He glanced around at the bustling street, then offered his arm. "Let's go somewhere quieter to talk." They walked to a small park near the center of town, a patch of green amid the dusty streets, with benches set beneath cottonwood trees that offered shade from the midday sun. Settling on one of these benches, they sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as life continued around them, children playing, women shopping, men going about their business. "I meant what I said," Yates finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "About the ranch east of here. About building a place where women like you and the others could find safety and a new start." Olivia's heart quickened. "And you're still willing to help make that happen?" "More than willing," he confirmed, turning to face her fully. "But there's something else I need to say, Olivia. Something I've been wanting to tell you since Springerville." The intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "What is it?" Yates took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "When I found you at the Whiskey Rose, I was just doing my job. But somewhere between there and here, something changed. I changed." He paused, searching for words that didn't come easily to a man more accustomed to action than declaration. "I've lived my life alone, thinking that was all I needed or wanted, but these past weeks with you, you've shown me what I've been missing." Olivia could scarcely breathe, afraid to hope for what his words seemed to be promising. "I love you, Olivia Grayson," Yates said simply. "And if you'll have me, I'd like to build that future we talked about, together." Joy, pure and unexpected, welled up within her, joy she had thought herself incapable of feeling after all she had endured. Yet here it was, bright and undeniable, breaking through the shadows of her past like the Arizona sun after a storm. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easily, naturally, as if they had always been there, waiting to be spoken. "And yes, I want that future. With you." The smile that transformed Yates's weathered features was like nothing Olivia had ever seen, open, unguarded, filled with a happiness that matched her own. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and touched his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tender, a promise rather than a demand. Olivia responded with a certainty that surprised her, her hands moving to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, Yates rested his forehead against hers, his voice a low murmur. "You'll never have to dance for anyone but yourself again, Olivia. And if you do, it will only be for joy. That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives." In that moment, beneath the cottonwood trees in a Tucson park, with the man she loved holding her as if she were something precious, Olivia believed him with every fiber of her being. The dance that had begun in fear and captivity would continue in freedom and love, a new rhythm for a life reclaimed, a future built on hope rather than despair. And that, she thought, as Yates drew her close once more, was worth all they had endured to reach this place, this moment, this beginning. 3 years later, the setting sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Hope Ranch, painting the adobe walls in shades of gold and amber. Olivia stood on the porch of the main house, watching as a wagon approached along the dusty road from Tucson, a familiar figure at the reins. Her heart lightened at the sight of Yates returning home, just as it did every time he appeared after one of his increasingly rare journeys. Though he still carried the marshal's badge, his duties had shifted over the past years, focusing more on training new recruits and consulting on difficult cases than active pursuit of outlaws. The ranch had taken shape around them, growing from a dilapidated homestead into a thriving community. The main house, once barely habitable, now stood solid and welcoming, with additions to accommodate the women who came seeking refuge and the small staff who helped run the place. Beyond it stretched out buildings, a barn, bunkhouses, a schoolroom where Sarah, who had discovered a talent for teaching, conducted classes for both the women and the handful of children who had come with them. Fields of wheat and corn grew along the creek, and a small herd of cattle grazed on the hillsides under the watchful eyes of two ranch hands, former soldiers who had proven themselves trustworthy and respectful. In the 3 years since the Blackwood trial, nearly 30 women had passed through Hope Ranch, some staying only long enough to heal and find their feet, others remaining to become part of the community. Currently, 12 women called the ranch home, each with her own story of hardship overcome, each finding her own path to recovery and purpose. The wagon drew nearer, and Olivia could now make out the passenger beside Yates, a young woman huddled beneath a shawl despite the warmth of the day. Another soul in need of the sanctuary the ranch provided. Olivia moved to the edge of the porch, raising a hand in greeting as the wagon pulled into the yard. Yates's face broke into the smile that still made her heart skip a beat, even after 2 years of marriage. "Welcome home," she called as he set the brake and jumped down from the wagon seat. "Good to be home," he replied, crossing to the porch to place a brief but tender kiss on her lips. Then, more quietly, "It's been a long journey." She's exhausted and frightened. Found her at a way station near the border. The owner was concerned and sent word to the marshal's office. Olivia nodded understanding, then approached the wagon where the young woman sat, unmoving. "Hello," she said gently. "I'm Olivia Parker. You're safe here." Slowly, the girl, for she couldn't have been more than 18, raised her head. Her face bore the marks of recent bruises, partially healed, and her eyes held the wary look of an animal too often abused. "I'm Catherine," she said, her voice barely audible. "Catherine Wilson," the marshal said. "He said you could help me." "He was right," Olivia assured her, offering a hand to help her down from the wagon. "We can and we will. Come inside. You must be hungry and tired." As they moved toward the house, Maria Elena emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Once one of the girls from the Whiskey Rose, she had discovered a passion and talent for cooking and now served as the ranch's head of household. "Another guest?" she asked, her English much improved over the years. "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "This is Catherine. She'll need a bath, clean clothes, and some of your good stew." Maria Elena nodded, her eyes kind as she assessed the newcomer. "Come, chica, we'll take care of you." As the two women disappeared into the house, Yates moved to Olivia's side, his arm slipping around her waist. "You've built something remarkable here," he said, his voice filled with pride as he surveyed the ranch that had grown from their shared vision. "We've built it," Olivia corrected, leaning into his embrace. "Together." It had not been an easy road. The early days had been filled with backbreaking work to make the abandoned ranch habitable, with uncertainty about whether their vision could succeed, with nightmares that still sometimes plagued both Olivia and the other women who had survived similar ordeals. But gradually, through determination and the support of unexpected allies from the territorial governor, who had provided additional funding after seeing the success of their initial efforts, to the local townspeople who had eventually overcome their suspicion of the rescue ranch and become supporters, Hope Ranch had taken root and flourished. "How are you feeling?" Yates asked, his hand moving to rest gently on the slight swell of Olivia's stomach, just beginning to show beneath her dress. "Well," she assured him with a smile. "The doctor says everything is progressing normally. Another 4 months before we meet our son or daughter." The joy in Yates's eyes at the mention of their expected child never failed to move Olivia. For a man who had lived so much of his life alone, the prospect of fatherhood had awakened a tenderness in him that complemented the strength she had always admired. "I've been thinking," he said as they moved into the house, away from the evening chill that was beginning to settle over the ranch. that it might be time to turn in the badge for good. Olivia looked up at him, surprised. Though Yates had scaled back his duties considerably since they had established Hope Ranch, becoming a full-time rancher and leaving the law enforcement to others was a step he had been reluctant to take. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I know how much your work has meant to you." Yates nodded, his expression thoughtful as he built up the fire in the main room's hearth. "It has, but things change, priorities change." He straightened, turning to face her fully. "When I put on that badge all those years ago, I did it because I wanted to make the territory safer. I think I can do that just as effectively here, helping you with the ranch, raising our child, giving these women a chance at a new life." Warmth spread through Olivia's chest at his words. "I'd like that," she admitted. "Having you here all the time, but only if you're certain it's what you want." "It is," he assured her, drawing her into his arms. "The ranch, our family, this is where I belong, where I want to be." As she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. From the terror of the Whiskey Rose to the peace of Hope Ranch, from captivity to freedom, from isolation to love, it had been a path she could never have imagined in those dark days in Springerville. Yet here she stood, surrounded by the life they had built together, carrying their child beneath her heart, secure in the knowledge that the future stretched bright and promising before them. Later that evening, after Catherine had been settled in one of the guest rooms and the ranch had grown quiet for the night, Olivia and Yates sat on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared one by one in the vast Arizona sky. "You ever think about that night?" Yates asked unexpectedly. At the Whiskey Rose, Olivia knew immediately which night he meant, the night he had walked into the saloon and changed the course of her life with a few quiet words and a hand extended in rescue. "Sometimes," she admitted, "not with fear anymore, but with gratitude. If you hadn't come in when you did." "But I did," he reminded her gently. "And here we are." Here they were indeed, a marshal turned rancher and a captive dancer turned advocate for women in need, building a life neither could have envisioned before fate and circumstance brought them together. As if reading her thoughts, Yates took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Dance with me," he asked softly. Olivia smiled, remembering his promise on that rain-soaked night 3 years ago. "There's no music," she pointed out. "We don't need any." Rising from the swing, he drew her to her feet and into his arms, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers as they began to sway gently in the starlight. No bullets at her feet, no leering audience, no fear, just the man she loved, the home they had created, and the future they would build together. As they moved across the porch in their quiet dance, Olivia felt the baby shift within her, a small flutter of movement that connected past to present to future in an unbroken chain. From the darkness of the Whiskey Rose to this moment of perfect contentment, it was a journey she would never have chosen, but one she could no longer regret, for it had led her here to this man, this place, this life. "Only for joy now," Yates murmured, echoing his promise from long ago as he held her close. "Always for joy." And as the stars wheeled overhead and the night wrapped around them like a blanket, Olivia Parker danced in her husband's arms, free and loved and complete, knowing with absolute certainty that his promise had been kept and would continue to be kept for all the days to come.